This meeting is being recorded.
So hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining us today in this final segment of our satellite workshop at NAACL. So this last session is going to be a panel discussion where we talk about how to navigate graduate school applications. So as we know, graduate school applications can be really difficult to navigate, not just because they're hard and they have so many different segments, but they also can be very obtuse with a lot of unknowns for applicants, with very low transparency on what really sets them apart and what to focus on when there are so many different issues like writing a personal statement and what to highlight there, or how grading systems may differ across countries and different requirements or expectations can be very, very distinct. So we'll try to shed light on some of these aspects with our very stellar and very diverse panel and their different perspectives on these issues. So I'll quickly introduce our panelists today. We have first Diyi Yang. Diyi is an assistant professor at the School of Interactive Computing at Georgia Tech. Her research interests are at the intersection of computational social science and NLP. And specifically, her goal is to understand the social aspects of language and build socially aware NLP systems to better support human-human and human-computer interaction. Our next panelist is Preethi Jyoti, who is an associate professor at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. Her research interests are broadly in machine learning, applied to speech and language, specifically focusing on Indian languages and low resource settings. We then have Vered Shwartz. Vered is an assistant professor at computer science at the University of British Columbia. Her research interests include common sense reasoning, computational semantics and pragmatics, and multi-word expressions. And finally, we have Kianté Brantley. Kianté is a postdoc scholar at Cornell, working with Thorsten Joachims. He completed his PhD in computer science at the University of Maryland, College Park, advised by Professor Hal Domey. Brantley, or Kianté, actually likes to design algorithms that efficiently integrate domain knowledge into sequential decision-making problems. He is most excited about imitation learning and interactive learning, or more broadly, settings that involve feedback loop between a machine learning agent and the input the machine learning agent sees. So we have a lot of different perspectives coming into this panel today, and without much further ado, we'll go into this panel. A very brief introduction for myself. I'm Sunipa. I'm a research scientist at Google. My research interests are at the intersection of computation, social science, and natural language processing as well. But yeah, let's dive into the questions, and feel free to respond to these questions in the chat, tweet at us, or DM us, or fill in the form, and we'll make sure we get to some version of the question in today's panel. So to start off, something that I think we want to ask our panel is what really sets apart a candidate to them. So every year, hundreds, if not thousands of candidates apply to each individual graduate program worldwide, and some specific schools or some specific research areas see more applications than others. And as NLP as a field grows rapidly, there is, with equal measure, an influx of a lot of applicants in the field, which makes it even harder somewhat to stand out. So what to you stands out the most in an application or in a candidate who wants to work with you? So yeah, feel free to jump in and add to comments, but just to get this rolling, I'll start off with Dee.
Yes, so yeah, I can relate to this question. When I was a student many years ago applying for graduate school, this was the question I wonder most. So I have been on the other side reviewing people's applications in the last 3 years. I would rank research experience as the top one dimension that matters when it comes to like choosing which student I want to work with. So here, I think a research experience means that it does not mean like, okay, you have to have certain number of publication or you have to have a publication, but the relevant research experience with regard to my research direction. For example, if someone wants to work on computational social science, then I probably need to look at first what relevant experience they have. Have they worked on something in this space? Have they or worked in a company that might match some of the topics we are looking at? And research experience get reflected in several ways. Some people prefer to use their research statement to talk about their experience, their motivation, etc. And I found the research statement to be a better venue compared to the other way where you can put it on your CV. CV is relatively shorter. Sometimes it just provides summarized information. So in the research statement, where I feel like we can highlight the relevant experience, make it concrete. Sometimes especially you mentioned there are thousands of applications. You see people mentioning, I'm interested in deep learning and that's all. So that's like too broad, right? You may want to go deeper into people, okay, is it about a contrastive learning or is it about a multimodal grounding or like very specific? So it gives the other side a little bit of information of, okay, what exactly you are interested in. How can we match you with some faculty who are in this direction so they can better review your applicants, etc. So I think the research experience highlighted in your research statement seems to be something I would recommend.
Thank you. Yeah. So like you said, like having like a concrete research direction or something as an interest definitely helps set somebody apart. But what do you makes like a good personal statement, or what reads really well that way is something that often becomes a big question. So I would like to reflect this or add on to this question and ask this to maybe Preethi, like not just like what stands out to you in an application overall, but what do you think stands out to you even in a personal statement, maybe?
Yeah, thanks, Sunipa. So I think personal statement, clarity of thought is something that I look for. And also in general, I think it's a good idea to kind of avoid flowery language. So keep the language simple and to the point. And also a statement of purpose should be authentic. I think people say this all the time, but if you read lots of these kinds of SOPs, when you're trying too hard to kind of fit some mold, it shows in your statement. So it really helps to be authentic, be very to the point, and also to hit some important points. So like Diyi already mentioned, I mean, research experience, not just research experience, but how you fit within this particular department and specifically how you fit in certain labs. Is very critical. So if you want your application to be reviewed by certain faculty members, then you need to kind of catch their interest and show how kind of your research interests align with what their labs are investigating. So I think kind of demonstrating fit is an important aspect in your SOP. And also kind of, do you demonstrate somewhat a kind of a mature awareness of the fields that you're talking about. So sometimes you'll tend to say things which are kind of say too ambitious. And so then, you know, sometimes it kind of demonstrates a lack of maturity. So it's good to kind of talk about the areas you're interested in, and not keep it too broad. So it's also important to kind of hone in on specific questions that you've been interested in and talk about work you've done and also address limitations openly and where you think you kind of the gaps are and how those could be potentially filled. Even if it's a limited understanding at that point, I think that it shows that you're able to critically think about problems. So I think those would be my kind of main points.
No, yeah, that sounds great. I would like to hear reflections from Vered and Kianté as well on this question. So maybe Vered can go first and then Kianté, and we would like to hear like in general, because that's the question we keep getting like from students who try to like get into universities? And this is like a very big question, right? Like I also went through this like maybe 6 years ago, and now it's become just harder. I feel like I see people making applications who I think have such great profiles, and it becomes hard for me to tell them what to do. So yeah.
Maybe I'll start with a few things about the what comprises a good statement. And I agree with everything that Preethi and Diyi said. So I think, yeah, you need to show some knowledge of the field, but also maybe adjust your statement a little bit to the specific school that you're applying for, but not in a shallow or superficial way. Don't just like copy paste names of people or papers if you haven't read them. Just if you don't have the time to actually read all the papers and everything, maybe it's better to not even mention them, because it's really obvious when people just mention titles of papers without reading them. Think about what are the gaps in the field that you want to address. And then there's a subtle point here about you don't want to be too specific, especially if you're applying for a PhD program, because you'll have 4 or 5 years. So you don't want to propose a specific project that you could do in a few months, but we also don't want to be too broad, and that's something that Preethi already said. I've seen a few statements that talk about like developing AGI. I think it's better to be humble. You're not gonna like solve the entire field in one PhD. I personally, I prefer statements that talk about problems rather than tools, because like if somebody says, I want to work with GPT-3, I don't think that's a good goal, because I think the tools change all the time, but the hard problems actually are there to stay. I also think that it's important not to repeat the CV because there are different purposes. So the CV talks about the past and the experience, and you want the statement to be a bit more forward-looking about what you want to do in the future, and how your past experience will allow that. And then the last thing would be to get feedback from whoever can help you with the applications. And I know even if you don't have access to I don't know, professors in your undergrad, there are sometimes I see that grad students sometimes offer their help on Twitter. So just look for that and try to get help from whoever you can. So that's about the good statement. And just like a few words about the research experience, I completely agree with you that it's very important. I was a bit naive last year when students were asking me, what do you look for in a student? And I said, well, you're applying for grad school to learn how to do research, so I don't expect that you already had research experience. But then when I reviewed hundreds of applications for students that want to work on NLP, it's natural that I would, it would be easier to know that to trust that the people who already have research experience would do well on research. So it definitely gives you advantage if you have research experience. At the same time, it's really hard to get that if you didn't get the chance to do any kind of research at your home university during undergrad. Sometimes I know a lot of students, they just email professors and try to get projects to work on. And I think that's fine, you could do that. I think the chances are pretty small, even though I know some people that succeeded in that. But something that a lot of people don't consider, and I think specifically in the US, in the rest of the world, it's pretty common, but you can always apply for a master's degree. So for a master's degree to get into the program, you don't need as much research experience. And you could get in based on grades from your undergrad, and then you could gain experience during master's, and then it's going to be easier to continue to a PhD program, especially if you want to stay at the same school with the same supervisor. It's going to be a lot easier. And I acknowledge that what I'm saying might not apply to the US, but I know that it's true in Canada and Europe and Israel, which is where I studied.
Thank you, Virat. Kianté, any thoughts you want to add on to how to make yourself stand out, how to maybe position your personal statement or referral letters or recommendation letters in a way to really make that application count?
Yeah, I think like a lot of the like key, most important points were touched upon. The only thing I would like to add is that, and it's something I do when I apply for just about anything, like I always reach out to like someone like that have gotten to the place that I want to go to. So if there's a university that you want to get into, there are tons of grad students that got into that university, and some may be open to sharing some of their material with you that they use to apply for the program. Some may not, some may not. And I've gotten emails from students in the past for whether it was a fellowship that I got or even like looking at my application that I submitted to College Park, like all these things. If anyone ever reaches out to me, I openly share all my material because a lot of the things that I've gotten is because I got to see some material that actually like got to the place I wanted to get to. So that's like the only thing I would like to add on. The other things that I would like to ask like some of the professors, like if a student doesn't have research experience, what is like tangential to research experience that also shows that like a student is able to do research? Because I was on a panel in the past and like professor at NYU said something that was very intriguing. They said like, I look for students who they've done like independent work. This shows that like you can do independent research. So have you seen things of someone doing independent work? Like you went to a hackathon, you developed a project, you won the hackathon, and the project was like it was like kind of like novel in a sense like that. So does those things stand out as well? Like are those things like close enough to research where you can consider those things as like independent as well? Or like how do you perceive those?
That's a great question. And in fact, that's something that that's something like our participants today, or like our audience today has also tried to ask, like, is industry experience enough, or like, does that count? Does it have to be an academic setting where they have done research, or is like having worked at a position somewhere, does that count? How do you perceive that when you get an application from somebody who's been at like outside academia for a while? Any thoughts? Please feel free to jump in at this point. And
yeah,
I viewed. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just want to say I do view it positively, and I actually don't want to rely only on research experience as the only thing that matters. I don't think that's true. I'm just saying that when you see applications of people that already have, especially when they already have publications at ACL or other venues like this, it's really hard to not prefer them. But I do view industry experience as positive, even if it's not research. And sometimes just the statement itself is just very well written, addressing some actual problems in the field, and not even like suggesting a solution, just saying that they want to work on that. I don't know about any specific thing, but sometimes it looks mature enough that even if the person doesn't have research experience, I would still consider them as a good student.
Yeah, I think we can definitely make the discussion more heated, right? And I agree with Varad that sometimes if you look at the thousands of applications, and there are a group of people with like very impressive CVs, it's really hard to say, okay, I ignore this part and then try something different. But we also know that that's going to be not a perfect process, because not everyone can have access to a great research environment in their undergraduate school, or they may not have great mentorship network, etc. So I think these days when we reflect on the hiring, on the admission process, sometimes it's also about like we are also going to look for students who demonstrate like independent ability in certain type of projects. For example, this year we gave an offer to a student who has no publication, but that student did exactly some sort of a competition that's related to outside, like not research oriented, but more like project based. And that's a strong indication that this person can do research and can have thinking and have good ability to finish or execute the proposed idea, right? So I definitely agree that that's a strong focus, or a sort of a focus we should shift a little bit. You also see that these days, many times we receive email from people who are even in high school, they want to do research or summer, etc. I mean, on one side, I feel very encouraged in a way that there are more people interested in our field. This is true. Okay. On the other side, you feel like, yeah, the space is definitely very competitive. So it's kind of challenging. So I basically echo what Verda said. I just want to mention that in many dimensions, the research experience, it's like a heuristic we can use. On the other side, it suffers from many aspects of potential disadvantages or things that we may ignore. So it's definitely not going to be the only metric. I think the first question was, okay, what's the most relevant? So yeah.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I fully agree with both Diyi and Vered. So if you don't have any research experience, and in India, that's often the case, many candidates who apply to us don't have prior research experience for the various reasons that the panelists have already stated, and no easy access to a research ecosystem, various other issues. So then we kind of resort to proxies. So first is, of course, their academic performance. So this is in the event of not having any other kind of evidence. And the other thing, of course, is recommendation letters, which I guess, Sunipa, you'll be coming to soon. So we look for whether the record letter writers point to any kind of aspects of the candidate which demonstrate independent thinking, and then they're able to carry out projects to completion. And then we all know, I mean, a large part of the PhD journey is being able to persevere, right? So we also look for, whether they're able to persevere with projects and not just leave them hanging. And also just to the point of, research experience, like Vered said, I mean, having that really does set you apart. I mean, as someone who's reading lots of applications, that certainly catches your eye. And I think for students who don't have access but are really keen on doing research projects, now there seem to be many venues opening up, and I'm sure many candidates are aware of it. So one is, of course, ML Collective. And even in India, there is IKDD, which is this kind of organization related to SICK-KDD. And so they have just started a program this year, where undergrads and master's students from various institutes in India can apply to a 3-month summer internship with faculty members. And so they just kind of solicit applications, hundreds of them, they help filter it out. So faculty members just need to apply to be mentors. And I think most faculty members are happy to do this. So I would urge candidates who are interested in research to look out for such opportunities and widely apply.
I think, Preethi, you've prompted my next question almost. But since we're covering a lot of time and I'm loving this conversation, I'm going to break this a little bit and try to conquer as much space as we can, or as many questions as we can, by breaking apart who answers what. So my next question is directed towards Kianté and Preethi about, for students who are coming from an underprivileged setting or background, what do you think they can do to set themselves up even better for getting opportunities, for getting a grad school program? Or how do you think they can cover ground to come and get these opportunities?
Yeah, I can speak. I can go first. So for me, before I applied to grad school, my institution, I basically took a grad class. And I took a grad class, like a special topics course. Like in the US, you can take a special topics course. And often I didn't notice at the time. I just took the course because it was like something I thought was fun. But like being on the other side, like I noticed that like special topics courses often when professors are like trying to like find students and do research and things like that off of projects. And the special topics course that I took, I actually kind of worked on a class project, and I got the grad student that I was working with to like push that project to a workshop paper. And that was my first time getting research experience. Like it wasn't planned, but it was a way for me to get some type of exposure. And I got like actual credit for it because it was a class that I took, but I also got a little bit of experience of doing research because the class was open in it. That's one thing that I did that helped out a lot for me, because I got a paper, like it was a workshop paper, but it was a paper under my belt. And the second thing I did was that for all the institutions that I wanted to, that I applied to, I looked at the professors and I sent the professors an email, all of them, saying that I wanted to apply. And I did my due diligence. So I read their papers, I read what they did, and I thought about what I wanted to work on. And I like kind of sent them an email talking about some of the papers they did. And I said what I wanted to work on. And then there was a little exchange of emails between the professors. And the professor I wind up doing my PhD with is one of the professors I actually emailed. So those are the two things that I actually did that helped me out a lot.
Yeah, I fully agree with Kianté. So like I mentioned, it's essentially exposure to research, and then try to get it any way you can. So if you're in an undergraduate institution where there are also graduate classes happening, then you go try take these graduate classes, especially in topics that you think you might be interested in, and then get acquainted with the instructor, ask if they have projects running, and talk to their PhD students, their graduate students, and try to get involved in some project if there is such an opportunity. And if that's not the case, then like I mentioned, broadly look for opportunities that these kinds of organizations are offering. At least apply. And I would say here that you never think that your profile is not good enough to apply. Just widely apply. I mean, self-doubt has no place here. And if you're interested in research, just apply. I mean, the worst case is you don't get selected, right? But if you don't apply, then there's not even a chance of that happening. So definitely apply widely. And to the other point, which Kianté mentioned, which is to email. So I think people have varying opinions on this. As faculty members who are inundated with emails, at least in my case, I'm not very good at being able to reply promptly to many such emails. You may not get an email back, a reply back, but this is my personal opinion. I think if you're able to write an email, like Kianté mentioned, where you can point to pieces of work which interest you and then speak meaningfully about it. So not just kind of paint, not talk very broadly about it, but kind of point to very specific questions. Even if you don't get a response, your emails are always read. So if your email is read, then there is a chance that this will kind of strike a chord. And when the faculty members are scanning through applications, they will probably look for your application, or at least take a second look at your application, because they might recall the email that they received. So I think personally that it's, especially when you're from communities where you don't have a lot of exposure to research, you should write emails to faculty members whose work you're interested in.
And at this point, I'll ask a very quick question, and you can be as candid as you want to all the faculty members on this panel. How much do you respond to cold emails, and what convinces you to reply? Or is there a good way to cold email, or not at all?
I can start. I responded to all emails, I think, this year. My only rule was if somebody didn't address me by my name, then I knew they just copy-pasted and emailed everyone else, so I didn't bother responding. But I actually don't think you should email professors unless you really have something meaningful to say. It's because I think a lot of people give this advice: email professors, it's going to make your chances, increase your chances to get into a program. But if everybody does that, then it doesn't help. It's just like we get hundreds of emails, which we either try to be nice and respond, or we just ignore them altogether. Especially when my website says something like, if you want to apply to the program, you could apply, you don't need to email me. And then I get an email with a CV, then I feel like, okay, either that person didn't read my website before they emailed me, or they don't care about my request. So, I mean, I don't think it like affects their chances negatively because I don't remember their names later. But at least in my personal experience, we review all the applications. We do like invest time to read all the statements and take every application seriously, regardless of where this candidate came from. So I don't find emailing very helpful. If the reason you're emailing is to ask a certain professor whether they are accepting students this year, then I would say you can check their website. Sometimes if people don't plan to accept any students in the following year, they just write it on their website. And if they don't write anything, you can assume that even if they don't really want to hire a lot of students or recruit a lot of students that year, if someone exceptional will apply, then they might still accept them. So yeah, my advice is don't email unless you have something very meaningful to say.
So the next question, and this one I'll direct to Vered and Dee. So what do you think comprises a good recommendation letter? Who do you think students should reach out to get recommendation letters from? And how much does that influence your decision about a student or a candidate?
I could jump in. Also, for the lighter, just quick takeaway from my experience. I think I reply to emails. The frequency of I reply to emails decline over time. In my first year, I reply as much as possible. Over time, I ignore as much as possible. But that does not mean that I don't read them. I read them and I know, okay, this is a candidate that I should pay attention to. But we also take admission very seriously. We read everyone's application by multiple faculty, and there will be a joint decision, etc. So don't worry too much if you don't email people. But there are also, the process could backfire sometimes. For example, like someone asks, oh, are you recruiting students? When can I hear back? This type of thing, like very generic questions. But if people email you every week, like if you receive, this is true, if you receive like 30 emails from one person in the 3 months of admission, that also means something, right? So it's very interesting. And also don't get people's name wrong. For me, I think I already know many different ways of spelling my name. I was not expecting any of those, but it's also very interesting to see. And also sometimes I receive emails that should be sent to other faculty. Like even the Dear Dr. Yang or something, it's wrong. Like it's going to be Dear Dr. whatever, whoever. And then I will forward that type of email for students to the other faculty. So yeah, getting back to letter, I feel also a lot of sentiment here in this process, especially with pandemic. For example, I teach big courses. I was not able to have any interaction with my students. I mean, Zoom is definitely one such thing. And I think this year, for many people who are applying for graduate school, the last 3 years are all kind of virtual for them. So this is something I think more important this year. The high level thing is, I think people understand. And let's go back to the course based. I also put some notes in the chat. I think if you don't have any related experience, like all internship or projects with any faculty, then coursework is still a good choice, especially for courses there is a course project component. And you probably want to reach out to faculty who you have relative more interaction, either asking questions or interaction during office hours or doing well in course project, etc. So I think those dimensions still matters. One thing that I found very helpful when students email me about those is they provide a very quick recap of what they did. For example, they could tell me 2 things that they feel like they did the most, like they did amazing in the course. So I can make sure that I remember them and then write them down, etc. So I think it's also a communication process, especially in these large courses. You can share what you have done and then something that you think other people might find useful to highlight, etc. Yeah, and then I can't forget the second part of the question. So this is for coursework letters. There are also research-oriented letters. So if you've done multiple projects, I think it's always good to find people who strongly advocate for you. That's more important versus finding someone who might be more famous, but they may not know your work very well. So that's just some suggestions.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Diyi said. I could add, especially the part about if you don't have any research experience and you need to get recommendation from professors whose courses you took, make sure that they know you, that they have something more to say other than that you got a good grade in the course. And maybe like if you TA'd their course or I don't know, if you were very active participant in the class or something. Another thing is if you have any industry experience, you could ask for letters from former bosses. It doesn't have to come from academia. It's better to have at least one that's from a professor, but other than that, if there's a former boss that knows you well, that could help as well. And I would say like sometimes it's hard to find enough people that know you well and that can write letters for you. But if you can find someone that knows you well and that seems eager to write the letter, that's important because the letters are really important. This is especially when we evaluate the applications, even if sometimes there's not enough. I don't know, there's not enough like content in the statement, but then the letters are really good. So I think it's a very good signal for us that someone is a really good candidate. So yeah, make sure it's someone who's eager to write a letter for you. If somebody tells you something like, yeah, please draft the letter and I'm gonna sign it, that maybe it's better to find somebody else. I mean, it's pretty common, so it happens sometimes, but if you could find someone else that can actually draft the letter, it's better because you're not going to be able to speak highly of yourself as much as a professor would. And then there's another subtle point here that the enthusiasm level differs between different cultures. When I evaluate the application, I really try to take that into account. I know that letters in North America are always very enthusiastic. And then letters coming from other countries, and we have a lot of international candidates. So I've seen letters coming from India or the UK or places where maybe letters tend to be a bit more I don't know, less enthusiastic. It's not necessarily saying anything about the candidate being less good than the other candidates. I really try to calibrate that. I hope that other people are also aware of that and are doing that too. It's not really an advice, I just wanted to mention that point.
No, that's a great point actually. Yeah, like not just grading systems, but writing styles, the degree of formality, all of this is so vastly different. Yeah, and going into grading that or like calibrating it is just incredible. So we have like a ton of audience questions. So instead of going into more of our questions, we want to do a switch and then ask these questions and like just to cover a lot of the questions that our audience has. And this one won't be in any specific order. So whatever you want to jump in for and answer, please feel free to do it. So one question that has come up in different ways is that how do masters or like master's level applications, are they graded differently as opposed to for a PhD? And what are the differences or how to position yourself differently, if at all?
I think that the main thing that I know that is different is that when you apply for, and I don't know if it's true everywhere, I know that it's true at UBC, is that when you apply for a master's, it's less important to focus on a specific area. You might mention a few areas you might be interested in working on, and even when you get accepted into the program, you don't necessarily immediately have a supervisor. You might spend the first semester taking courses, and then you take courses in different areas, and you find the areas that you like better, and the professor who would be willing to supervise you. So and then accordingly, you also don't need research experience in a specific area. And so when we evaluated master's applications, we were looking more at academic performance in undergrad, and then like research experience would just be like a bonus, but it's not necessarily something that everybody has.
Another question is, when you're not applying to like a specific lab, but to a general program, like just to like have the better of the odds, right? If you're applying to a very specific professor and you haven't mailed them, but you want to join them, then you can cater it or like make your letter very specific. But the downside to that is if they're not recruiting somebody, or if they have somebody else in mind, then you lose out. So what's the trade-off point? How to write a statement or how to position yourself so that you're aligned with professors that you're like interested in, but also in the general program. Is there any recommendation for that on how to toe that line?
Maybe I can say a quick thing. So I think it's probably strategic not to just mention one name or even say one or two names, but rather mention an entire sub-area, subfield, and maybe all the faculty who work in that sub-area. Because like it was mentioned earlier, you getting an admit, it's a function of lots of variables, including whether the faculty members are taking students. And I mean, you just need to get into the program because once you get into the program, it's not that, the people you wrote down in your SOP have to commit to taking you, right? So once you're in the program, you can even kind of check out other sub areas that you might then get interested in. So the key is to kind of get into the program. And so then there you should be strategic about kind of keeping it slightly broad. So narrow down into a sub area and then maybe mention a few faculty members. I think that would be my advice.
Another question is, if you had to rank in degree of importance for an application, how would you rank GPA and coursework, like just versus publications and research experience in internships and otherwise, versus recommendation letters and maybe GRE or like any like standardized like tests where applicable? Of course, some places it's not applicable, but for places where it is, like how would you grade that? What's the spectrum? How much is the GPA important?
I can elaborate a little bit. I think if I have to rank research experience and recommendation letters, I think the tier one thing that I'm looking at personally, CV and the coursework, I think those two are the next. The last thing I look at is some type of English proficiency, because that's also very important, right? However, we understand that the people might come from different places, including myself. I think that's like basically like my personal ranking. In terms of the coursework GPA type of thing, I also want to clarify a little bit. You do not need to be perfect at everything. Like it's not like we only recruit people for 4.0 out of 4.0. But you do not I mean, you do not need to be perfect, but you also need to be reasonable so that, okay, we know you are capable of like a wider range of knowledge, etc., right? Because by the end of the day, a PhD or a graduate program, you need to be deep in something. You do not need to have 4.0, but if you have something like 2.0, that's not going to work out. So I still think that do not be perfect, but try to have a relative good portfolio. And sometimes we also make exceptions to students whose like overall GPA might be low, but the courses related to the direction they are applying to are extremely amazing or high. Then that's also something you can demonstrate, right? Or you can mention it explicitly in your application package.
Now, applications can be very expensive, as we know, and trying to find the right programs to apply to can be a tricky subject. So what helped you narrow down on what programs to apply for, or what are your recommendations in general for places to apply for, but whether it's rankings, location of the program, whether it's in a city or isolated, a number of professors in the area? What is it that helped you choose where you wanted to go, or what you recommend people do now, if there is anything?
Maybe I can start. It's not based on my experience applying to PhD programs, because I did all my degrees in the same university and I only applied to one program. But I'm generalizing from my experience when I was applying for faculty positions, because I think it's pretty similar in that sense. So some of the aspects are similar. The one of the aspects that was really important for me was location. And I think it should be important for a PhD program as well. You need to ask yourself, will I be happy living there for 5 years or more? And it is important. Don't think that it's. I mean, some people sometimes think they have to be in a PhD program, so they settle for somewhere where they think they're not going to be fine. And answering this question with maybe is also fine. But if you think you're going to be unhappy there, and it's not a good idea, don't apply there. And then other questions I think you should ask yourself is, well, first of all, if there is a potential supervisor there that you would like to work with, and if well, that's not less necessary, but if there are other people working on the same area, so in case that person leaves, you would still have another supervisor. And then probably more important, what is the funding situation in that program? What is the cost of living in that city? Sometimes it's hard to find this info from the school websites, but you could see if you could find existing students to ask about these things. It's pretty important, I think.
Yeah,
so we're almost at time. So, sorry, Preethi, were you saying something?
Oh no, I was just going to maybe add on. Again, I'm not going to kind of draw from my experience at all, because I was completely unaware when I've applied to grad school, but I'm relating more from the experiences of my students who are now, in many top NLP programs. And so one thing, of course, is how much you liked interacting with your potential advisor. So I think rankings is one thing, but for many students and many of these schools, you do have an interview stage, or if you're, I think in the US, you have in-person visits. So they're kind of interacting with your potential advisors and then making sure that you really like talking to this person and engaging with this person, because your advisor is someone you're going to be interacting with constantly for 5 years or whatever the duration. So that I think is really critical. Much more, I would say, than rankings. And luckily, I mean, in NLP, there are amazing faculty in various institutes and not just the top tier institutes. So I think as if you're a candidate who's interested in NLP, you're well positioned in terms of finding faculty members in a number of different institutes. So I think that is also an important factor. I just wanted to kind of add that.
And the last thing I'll add really fast is understanding like the culture of the place you're applying to. So I stayed in Maryland. I just went from from UMBC, which is a small institution, to a big institution. And I kind of stayed locally because I'm from Maryland. But my advisor went on sabbatical for a short period of time in New York, and I got to hang out at NYU. So I only applied to like local schools in Maryland, but now I went to NYU and I saw that the cultures were different. And I like both cultures, but I got to see a contrast of like how one university culture is versus another. And I had no idea cultures were so different in different places. So asking like current graduate students like questions to sort of understand the culture of the place you're going to, I think is very important, because if you come from a like an underrepresented background, like certain cultures you may not like versus other cultures. I happen to be at two places where I really like the culture. You may apply it to a place that you really want to go to and figure out the culture kind of clashes with what you're like comfortable with. So I think that's also something to definitely take into account.
Absolutely. So thank you for all the great points. So since we're almost pushing at time, I'll shorten the last question that I sort of had. So instead of just general advice to students or applicants, if you think they should have taken away one thing from this panel as they go into grad school applications, what would that be? Maybe we'll start with Kianté.
I'll be short and sweet. Believe in yourself, like apply broadly, at least like the where your limits allow you to. You never know a place that you can get into unless you apply. And if you don't know what like good material looks like, always reach out to a graduate student, someone who's gotten to the program, because I've gotten plenty of people who reached out to me and I happily give them all my material. And sometimes I'll reach out to other folks, and sometimes people give me material, sometimes they don't. But, just always apply. You never know what can happen.
I can say maybe summarizing some different advice given by different people in the panel. Try to maximize your happiness. So that includes like finding a supervisor you'd be happy to interact with, or finding a school that is located in a city you would like to live in, working on problems that are interesting for you. And if that means that if you couldn't find something like that this time, then maybe wait for a while, maybe work in industry for a while and then apply again. Don't settle for things that you think would make your life hard. It is a pretty substantial amount of time, like 5 years is a long time. You need to think about your wellness as well as your future goals.
Yeah, so I'll just again echoing both Kianté and Vered, apply widely, reach out for help. If you don't get it from certain people, then again reach out more widely to grad students, other students who have applied to these places, what worked for them. And also just one maybe meta point, which I want to mention, is that this is a very competitive space. I mean, currently it's crazy how good the applications are, right? I'm sure Diyi and Vered are seeing extremely amazing applications. So I just want to mention that, if in the worst case you don't get an admit, don't treat it as an indictment of your abilities to do research or anything, because there's so much stochasticity in the whole process. There are so many variables. You not making it, it's really not a reflection of your application or the strength of your application. So I think it's easy to say, but don't get really disheartened. If your heart is really in research, then you should kind of reconsider, and then maybe reach out to a few people to see how your application could be further strengthened, again, to the various kind of mentorship programs. But then, go for it again, and don't be disheartened.
So from my side, I would recommend taking a step back and think about why you want to do a PhD. Is doing PhD really something you are passionate about? By the end of the day, I mean, it's a lot of preparation, logistics, everything, right? But by the end of the day, it's about you and the research you want to do. So thinking it clearly why you want to do a research and always have that sort of, I guess, beginner's mind of passionate towards research. That's what drives you towards your degree. And last but not least, I think finding a peer support network is very important. So bond with other people. I think maybe today there are already many people here. So message people, get a small cohort who are going through a similar process with you, support each other. I think those are all very important.
Thank you so much for highlighting all of these excellent points, like finding somebody, like finding either a support network or a professor or a lab who really supports you, who really gets you is important. I definitely think I lucked out, but I've heard so many stories of people who had to quit and restart because they didn't match. And yeah, I think what all of you said in different ways, do what's best for you and believe in yourself. I think that's something that everybody should take home from this. So thank you so much of like our panel. You gave us so much good advice today. Special shout out to Diyi, who answered a lot of questions in chat. Thank you so much. This really helps. For some questions that we didn't get to, or if you have any other questions, please feel free to email us at the WiNLP email, and we'll try to our best to consolidate some answers for you and get it back to you. And thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to our great panel for giving us such great answers and such an engaging conversation. I'll pass it off to Haley now, who is going to close our workshop for us today.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again to our wonderful speakers. So glad to have had you. And welcome to everyone. It sounds like some people stayed up really late to join us, so really appreciate that. It was great to have this event. Please look for us at EMNLP in December. If you are submitting a paper, know that we will have funding to help send people to EMNLP in person, though we will also have an online component. So please do submit or tell people you know to submit because we would love to host you. Finally, we'll be sending out an email after this, which will include a link inviting you to the Widening NLP Slack community, which we'd love to have you join. We share resources and scholarship stuff and call for papers. It's a great community to kind of keep up with everyone when we're not having workshops. So thank you all again for coming, and I hope to see you at the next Widening NLP workshop.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care all.